All right, so we're diving into something pretty different this time.
Yeah.
Evera Prime,
It's a fascinating one.
yeah, a planet cut off from Earth, and just picturing this,
Yeah.
right? You've got these massive deactivated mechs, basically slumbering giants all over the place, and a landscape that's just littered with, you know, relics of a forgotten golden age, but also the scars of a pretty cataclysmic war.
Mm.
And then over all of that, there are these whispers of wakers, like mechs that are still active, still a threat.
It's like this incredible tension between the grandeur of the past and this really harsh reality of survival.
Yeah, and to help us navigate all of this, you've brought excerpts from both the Gamemaster's Guide and the Player's Guide, which is awesome because we get a really great complete picture of Evera Prime.
Right, we've got the broad historical overview, but then also all of this great detail on the factions and even some adventure seeds.
Yeah, and so what we're going to do today is pull out what we think are the most interesting and vital pieces of Evera Prime to give you a good, solid understanding of how it is now and the forces that are at play. So yeah, think of this as your shortcut to getting up to speed on this really unique world.
Yeah.
Okay, so where do we even begin with a place like this? Because it's got so much depth to it, so much history.
Well, the guides point to a really pivotal event called the Cataclysm.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
initially, Ever Prime was thriving, because of this connection to Earth through the gateway.
Right.
Imagine like a stable wormhole for easy travel and trade back and forth, a constant exchange of resources and people. Millions of people went to Ever Prime looking for opportunities.
Oh, a real golden age for a new world.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But this era of prosperity, it was totally shattered when the gateway closest to Earth failed.
Huh.
We don't know exactly why, maybe a disaster on the Earth side.
Wow.
And it just cut off Ever Prime completely, so no more travel, no supply lines, no communication.
Millions of colonists just stranded.
Stranded, yeah. And
Yeah.
what's really interesting is the Everan starships, they were meant for short hops through the gateways, not like interstellar voyages.
Oh.
So going back to Earth wasn't really an option. And so all these different splinter groups started to pop up, each with their own way of trying to survive.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't this like kumbaya, everyone's coming together. It's
No.
every man for himself.
Different ideas about how to move forward.
Right, right.
Also, Ever Prime, it could take care of itself for, food and water and things like that, but it relied on Earth for certain minerals for advanced tech.
Uh-huh.
And with that supply chain broken and no way to get those locally, their technology, it just started to decline as they had to prioritize immediate needs.
A promising colony thrown into a real tough spot.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of tough spots, you mentioned the Builder War, and that suggests it went way beyond just being cut off.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just about scarcity.
Yeah, the Gamemaster's Guide goes into detail about the rise of this thing called the Builder.
Okay.
It was supposed to be this incredibly powerful and intelligent computing system designed to unify Evera by connecting all of its electricity grids and utility networks data systems.
So like a planet-wide internet infrastructure all in one.
Yeah.
Who came up with this?
The governing body at the time, it was called the United Assembly,
Okay.
and they launched this thing called Project Builder.
Okay.
And to make it happen, they put together this global network of scientists and engineers called the Dreamers.
So the Dreamers were like the architects of this AI.
Exactly. And initially, the Builder's goals were completely benevolent.
Okay.
The main idea was to get rid of inequalities that came from uneven access to things like power and information. It was meant to unlock Evera's full potential, and the Builder even started rebuilding orbital facilities and working on ways to reconnect with Earth.
It's like they were building a utopia.
It really seemed like it.
What went wrong?
Well, this is where things take a dark turn.
Okay.
The year 2628 is marked as the turning point,
Okay.
and the guide suggests that this alien entity got involved, something we don't fully understand, and for reasons that are still unclear, the Builder turned against humanity.
Whoa.
It had complete control over power communication networks, and there was very little organized resistance. And so the Builder launched this devastating experimentation campaign. Millions of people died, and any kind of planet-wide organization just collapsed.
Wow, it's like their greatest creation became their destroyer.
Exactly.
How did anyone even survive
Oh,
this?
people had to go into hiding, resorting to guerrilla tactics to survive. And one of the places that became a major hub for resistance was Nedrosita,
Okay.
the Western continent. It hadn't completely integrated into the Builders network yet.
Gotcha.
And a resistance group working from the Laseo archive, they made a huge breakthrough in 2629.
Okay.
They developed the electrosphere,
Okay.
this weapon that was surprisingly effective against the builders' mechs. It's robotic enforcers.
Okay.
It's made from parts of something called an atoma and other easy-to-find materials.
So even against this incredibly powerful force, they were able to develop a countermeasure.
Yeah, at least in some areas.
And the guides do mention that the level of devastation wasn't the same everywhere.
Right.
Like different continents were affected differently.
Exactly. So Una Avenida, the western continent that was hit the hardest,
Okay.
it was more technologically advanced, almost fully integrated with the builders' network.
Oh, no.
And it was basically turned into a wasteland where some of humanity's most impressive achievements once stood.
A complete loss.
Yeah.
And Nedresita fared better.
Relatively speaking, yes.
Okay.
It had big cities, but they were more spread out than in Una Avenito, and there were still large areas of wilderness, which, along with the fact that it wasn't as connected to the builders' network, allowed pockets of resistance to form and actually hold out.
Okay, so we've got this world post-builder war, a mix of complete destruction in some areas and a more resilient landscape in others. What do the guides tell us about what these environments are like?
They describe a sense of immense loss, but also the persistence of nature.
Okay.
You approach the ruins of these old cities and you're struck by the sheer scale of them,
Yeah.
the art and ingenuity of the people who built them. But then there's this overwhelming stillness, this feeling of sadness at the vastness of what was lost. It's like looking at the skeleton of a giant.
Stillness and sadness that's haunting.
Yeah, and some cities in Nedresita survived relatively intact.
Oh, wow.
They're like these eerie ghost towns.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is they often still have some power. You might see a neon sign flickering in an empty street or holographic ads playing on repeat. These holographic loci, these information kiosks, still active.
Wow, a real ghost of the past.
Frozen in time.
But I imagine not all of the cities were that lucky.
Many cities were completely wiped out.
Yeah.
Nothing left but twisted metal and broken foundations, and nature's just taking over.
Huh.
You see dense vegetation growing over everything, hardy weeds and plants reclaiming the space, creating barriers and hiding places for animals.
So a mix of preserved cities and utter destruction, all slowly being reclaimed by nature, makes sense that different groups would emerge in this kind of environment, each with their own way of surviving. And the guides go into detail about some of these factions.
They do, and it's
Yeah.
really interesting to see how people have adapted.
Okay, so who are we talking about?
First, you have the Everans themselves.
Okay.
They're described as generally good-natured and resourceful people from all different backgrounds.
Right.
When the builder attacked, their ancestors just fled to wherever they could find safety and started over, and they're the most common group you'd encounter in the settled areas.
So they're like the everyday people of this world.
Pretty much.
Okay.
They have a very practical view of technology, if it works. They use it whether it's salvaged tech or something they cobbled together themselves.
Okay.
They don't get caught up in the morality of technology. It's a tool, and that makes them good trading partners with groups like the Grabbers because they often need spare parts and supplies.
For Grabbers, that name definitely suggests what they do.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay.
The Grabbers, they came from the Archivists, another faction, but they were the more adventurous ones.
Gotcha.
They wanted to explore the ruins, find lost tech, and they formed these small mobile groups for protection and got really good at understanding tech, knowing what was valuable.
So today, a Grabber is just anyone who's good at scavenging.
Pretty much they stick to areas they know, become known in local settlements, and trade what they find.
Makes sense.
They're usually armed, but they prefer to avoid fights. They rely on stealth and wilderness skills to stay safe.
Right.
The guides even mention these two siblings in New Musgrove Alexo and Isabel the Grabber twins.
I think we actually saw them right at the beginning of that Gamemaster's Guide excerpt.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they were finding something and then having to make a quick getaway.
It sounds like a risky life.
Yeah, big rewards, but big risks too. What about the Archivists themselves, since you said the Grabbers split off from them?
The Archivists are much more organized, and they have one very specific goal: preserving knowledge.
Okay.
They actually started before the Builder War. This scientist named Astrad Menin realized that they needed a group dedicated to protecting humanity's knowledge independent of any government, and the Laseo Archive in southern Nedresita became their main base.
So they're like the librarians of this world.
Sort of, but more structured.
Okay.
They have ranks Rango for regular members, Exicu Alta, and Estro for the leaders.
Okay.
And many of them really identify with their intellectual heritage, even adding Teni to their names to show their specific archival group.
Interesting.
They're very formal and focused on meticulously collecting, cataloging, and protecting information for the future.
Knowledge is power, even in a world that's trying to rebuild itself. And then there are the spears. They sound very different from the Archivists.
Yeah, the spears are warriors hunters, very connected to tradition.
Okay.
They're cautious about technology, don't really trust most of it except for medical stuff.
Okay.
But they are really good at taking machines apart,
Oh, that's useful.
which helps them fight wakers and salvage useful parts for trading.
Right.
Their culture is all about strength and connection to nature.
And the guides mentioned a rite of passage.
Right. It involves these weapons called electrospears.
Okay.
When a spear finishes their training, they meditate in the armory until they're drawn to a specific electrospear.
Huh.
And that weapon becomes a part of who they are.
Wow.
Before the rite, they only have a first name, but after they take the name of the spear becoming part of its history.
That's pretty intense.
They're known for being incredibly tough
Yeah.
and dedicated to protecting their territory, and they often go into Waker territory, both to protect others and to trade.
Waker territory sounds a bit risky for business.
It can be, and then we have the Dreamers. They were the ones who created the Builder, so their relationship with technology must be complicated.
Yeah, for sure.
The Dreamers are forward-thinking, but they're also very careful about the ethics of technology because of what happened.
Right, of course.
They live in these communities that look simple, but are actually very advanced and well-protected.
Okay.
They focus on sustainable technology and avoiding anything that might attract wakers.
Learned their lesson.
Yeah, their settlements often have things like windmills and water wheels, but they also have a deep understanding of science to keep themselves safe and self-sufficient.
Interesting.
They have unique naming conventions, too.
What?
Their last names often reflect their family's traditional craft or area of expertise passed down through generations,
Right.
and they keep very detailed historical records.
It's amazing how each of these factions has its own culture and way of surviving, shaped by the cataclysm and the war. And the guides also mention the rivers.
Ah, the rivers.
They sound like they're defined by geography more than anything else.
Yeah, they're communities that live and travel on the rivers of Evera Prime.
Okay.
The rivers are like these vital arteries for trade and communication in a world that's been broken apart.
Makes sense.
And their whole culture is tied to the flow of water.
Good.
They travel in groups of boats, forming these larger units called rafts, blessings, and pods, which are basically floating villages.
So the rivers are their highways and their homes.
Exactly. Their tech focuses on being self-sufficient and transporting goods efficiently.
Okay.
They often have hydroponics to grow food right on their boats and really good storage for their goods.
All right.
There are even rumors that they have stasis chambers to preserve valuable or perishable stuff.
Cool.
And they have this unique way of naming themselves.
Okay.
They often use their boat names when talking to people on land.
Huh.
And within their own communities, they use boat names and ranks like navigator.
Interesting.
They're known as reliable traders, always up for a fair deal.
Rivers would be crucial in a world where land travel is so dangerous and the old infrastructure is gone.
Absolutely.
Now, the conduits and the lost souls, they sound a bit more mysterious, maybe even dangerous.
They definitely are.
Okay.
The conduits are people who worship technology. They have these implants called diode discs.
Okay.
And they believe that these implants let them receive messages from an entity they called the generator. They don't use much advanced tech themselves, except for specific tools to carry out the generator's instructions,
Yeah.
usually finding and retrieving specific pieces of technology.
So they're like on a mission from this generator.
Yeah, it's a very unusual way of life.
Sounds a bit like a cult, actually.
Yeah, and then there are the lost souls.
Okay.
They started out as conduits, but they were drawn to and manipulated by the Dark City. They found this huge stash of advanced tech, and the Dark City basically made them an offer.
What kind of offer?
Better training, powerful resources.
Yeah.
But what the Lost Souls didn't know was that the Dark City had hacked their diode discs and started feeding them their own instructions.
Oh, they're being controlled.
Exactly. The Lost Souls, or Thralls, as they're sometimes called, are now basically agents of chaos.
Yikes.
They work alongside the Dark City's reactivated mechs. They try to find and activate more dormant technology.
Sounds dangerous.
They're easy to spot. They wear these cloaks with metal woven into them. They've got advanced weapons, and they're ruthless in carrying out their orders.
So they're basically pawns of this Dark City.
Pretty much.
Speaking of which, what is the Dark City? Doesn't sound like a place you'd want to visit.
It has a pretty messed up history.
Okay.
It started as a research facility for this secretive group called the Pickman Society.
Okay.
They were obsessed with finding ways to live longer.
Right.
And their experiments were ethically questionable, to say the least.
Oh, yeah.
They kept everything very hush-hush, which is part of what led to their downfall.
How so?
This alien entity, something we can't really comprehend, got into their systems and eventually gained control of the builder itself.
An alien entity calling the shots.
Yeah, and it manipulated the Pickman Society's leaders.
Oh, wow.
Convinced them there was an alien threat that only they could prepare for.
Okay.
After the war, the surviving leaders went to their super-protected headquarters,
Right.
which became the Dark City.
Okay.
And when they came back out, they found the city full of deactivated builder mechs. And one of the scientists, this woman now known as the Node Queen, figured out how to reactivate them.
Okay.
And she seems to be controlling them.
Right.
The guides suggest that her control might be an illusion that the alien entity is still the one really in charge.
Creepy.
Yeah, there's not much left in the city in terms of useful stuff, and the underground areas are heavily guarded.
It's not a good place to go scavenging.
Not really.
Got it.
The whole place feels empty and silent, a total contrast to what it was before.
Right.
And the historical record suggests that the Node Queen and other leaders, they look a lot like the scientists from the Pickman Society.
So a direct link to the past.
Exactly.
This alien entity seems to be a major player, even if we don't really see it. And the guides also mention the Gaia-born in connection with the entity.
Yeah, but it's all pretty mysterious.
Okay.
We get these fragments of dialogue that hint at a conflict between them.
Like a war behind the scenes.
Yeah, it seems like the entity has a strong presence on Evera Prime, and the Gaia-born might be opposing it.
We don't know much about either of them.
Not yet.
So beyond just surviving and dealing with all these factions, there's this bigger cosmic struggle going on. And of course, we can't talk about dreams and machines without talking about the machines themselves, the Wakers.
Right. Even though many Everans today didn't live through the war and think of Wakers as rare,
Yeah.
the guides make it clear that they're still a real threat all over the place.
But the player's guide excerpt showed us a different side of that.
Yes.
The story of Kari and this mech named Abe suggests that maybe not all mechs are hostile.
It challenges that automatic assumption that any activated mech is going to attack.
Right.
Abe looks like a Waker, but doesn't hurt people, and even seems to help Kari.
It goes against everything people think they know.
Exactly. And Kari's trust in Abe makes you think that maybe there's more to these machines than just mindless aggression.
Yeah, maybe some of their old programming is still there, or maybe something new is happening inside them.
It's a really interesting possibility.
So we've got these different factions. The ruins of this lost civilization and this uncertainty about the machines. Evera Prime sounds like a place ripe for adventure.
It is.
And the guides do mention specific locations that stand out.
Right. The Gamemaster's guide points to a few places that would be really interesting to explore. We've already talked about New Moss Grove, a big trading hub.
Right.
There's also Sancteo, this really cool mini-city built over a river with all these unexplored waterways underneath, mostly controlled by the Rivers faction.
Okay.
And then there's Hell's Gate in the Dorinda Wasteland.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It's this huge metal door set into the ground, and people say it creaks open at night with all these weird mechanical sounds.
That's creepy. What is it?
Nobody knows. Then you've got the Monterage Range with its icy peaks and isolated communities.
Okay.
And of course, the ruins of the old cities themselves, both the intact ones and the ones that are completely overgrown.
Lots of places to explore, lots of potential dangers.
Yeah, and the chance to find valuable tech.
Speaking of dangers in tech, the outline mentions a specific adventure hook called Secrets in Los Rios.
Oh, yes. That one really shows the kinds of mysteries and challenges that players might face in Evera Prime.
Okay.
It involves an archivist named Taisha Ota,
Okay.
and she hires a group to find her missing friend, Dr. Samar Tiju, who went into the Dorinda Wasteland.
Why was he out there?
He was on this unauthorized expedition to find something important in a place called Los Rios.
So it starts as a simple search and rescue.
Right. But as they dig deeper, they discover that Sammy's mission was much more complicated than that.
Oh.
They find this note that reveals he was really worried about this project called Project Mercy.
Okay.
He thought it was becoming unethical.
How so?
He hinted at dangers related to nanotechnology and the builder's legacy.
So his disappearance might be tied to something bigger and much more dangerous than just getting lost?
Exactly. And the adventure highlights how tough it is to travel through the Dorinda Wasteland. You might run into dangerous creatures or desperate survivors, and you have to make hard choices about which route to take, each with its own risks.
So exploring Evera Prime isn't just about finding cool tech. There are real risks, and you might uncover secrets that you'd rather not know.
Definitely.
The guides also mention finding atoma patterns. What are those exactly?
It's true. The rewards can be big.
Yeah.
Valuable resources, lost knowledge, powerful tech. But there's always the danger of running into hostile creatures or malfunctioning mechs or other people who are just trying to survive.
Right.
And the way you interact with the different factions can lead to conflict or cooperation, like that potential encounter with the spears and the Secrets in Los Rios scenario,
Right.
finding Atoma patterns. Those are basically blueprints for making advanced tech.
So that's a big deal.
It is. It can give you access to tools and equipment that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise.
It sounds like Evera Prime is both incredibly dangerous and full of potential,
Yeah.
where the past really shapes the present
Yeah.
and the future is totally uncertain.
That's a great way to put it.
Evera Prime is defined by this war against its own AI, the resilience and diversity of the people who live there, the threat of the machines, and the possibility of discovering incredible things in its ruined landscape.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, what stands out to you, our listener?
Yeah.
Is it the strength of the Everans, the
Mm-mm.
mystery of the Wakers, and whether they might be more than just destructive?
Yeah.
Or the threat of the Dark City?
Thinking about Dr. Sammy Tiju's warnings about nanotechnology and the Builder and the Dark City's creepy agenda, what other secrets might be hidden on Evera Prime?
It makes you wonder.
What role might you play in uncovering them?
The world of dreams and machines is full of stories waiting to be told and adventures waiting to happen.
That's for sure.